Hey guys, it's DT from Bags, and welcome to the Cash Pod, your go-to guide to building a better, bigger, cash flowing business. Thank you for spending some time with us today as we talk about everything business growth, mastering your finances, access to capital, and doing it all whilst maintaining yourself as a business owner. On today's episode, we've got something a little bit different for you. We're going to be talking about a report that we just put out, which essentially breaks down currently the state of Black-owned businesses in the US, their access to capital, their pain points, the history of access to capital for minority and women-owned businesses, as well as some of the impact that we're having as an organization at Bags. So stay tuned. Let's dive into it. Excited for today's episode of the Cash Pod. I've got my wonderful colleague Paula joining us today, who has even more experience than I do in the small business lending space. And so we figured it would be right for, her to be the guest on today's pod as we talk about this incredible report that is out currently. Paula, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I know it's one of the main points in Bag's mission and the reason why Bags came to exist.
Yep, absolutely. It really is. And so, to that point, I think it's probably worth starting and restating some of the reasons why Ignacio William and I have founded this company. And then I'll hand it over to you and we can sort of dive into some questions that I know you've got and then take it from there. But yeah, we started Bags 4.5 years ago, really with the goal of building a platform that can increase access to capital to better enable businesses to grow, with a specific focus on minority women-owned businesses. And to get even more detail, to be honest, like when we first started Bags, summer of 2020, post the murder of George Floyd, I really wanted to start this business to build a better solution for Black-owned businesses and businesses within my community to enable them to have the capital to grow so that they could, hopefully generate more wealth for themselves, build bigger businesses, hire and retain great talent, create jobs, and really have an impact on their local economies. And what we found early on within our days was like part of what we wanted, part of our mission, part of our goal was to like figure out why there was an access to capital gap and like what those pain points are and potentially how we could build something to solve those pain points. Because we were honestly pretty shocked that there was a huge lack of data in the space. So I'm really excited about this report because it actually shines a light on like one of the things that we wanted to uncover from the get-go.
Yeah, and I want to go from like what you're talking about, the data that we were looking for to find and understand the market, understand the mission of Bags, but there's a lot of data that isn't out there readily available to understand the problem. And it's a problem that reflects historical practices that have perpetuated the access to capital gap. And up until today, we see this problem happening on and on. There are, of course, different actions taken by other companies and other institutions, but I think that it's still something that needs to be addressed. How do you think these societal attitudes and government actions towards women and minorities in businesses have historically influenced their access to capital?
That's an incredible question because I think you're like, if we don't look back to understand where we are, it's kind of hard to assess like where we could go. And so, it actually, we have to look at it from sort of the last 100 years, which feels like a long time ago, but it really isn't. Listen, there was, especially starting in the 20s all the way through the 70s, redlining was a pretty common practice, right? Which essentially meant that as people were designing cities and communities, they were setting up individual neighborhoods that were specifically meant for minorities with a purpose of excluding those individuals from other neighborhoods that were built to be more homogenous, right? The practice of redlining directly contributed to the banking practices, right? Because the actual banking institutions themselves would look at these maps and therefore make credit decisions, right? There's more that we can go into on the redlining side, but kind of like bringing it forward and some of the things that happen. I mean, and it's even, worth touching on the fact that, women couldn't open a bank account without their husband as a cosigner until 1974, right? And so when you think about that, that's 74, it's 50 years ago, right? And so when you think about that as a part of the equation as well, right? Like when you combine the history of redlining with the fact that women as a core segment of entrepreneur in the US couldn't actually be standalone entrepreneurs without their partners, it kind of paints the picture that, okay, the infrastructure that is built to support small business lending historically has been very, very segregated, and not necessarily built for all those involved. But there were certain policies put in place, like the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which was, in 1974, which essentially was a first step in allowing both women to get access to credit, but also to remove racial bias, gender bias from the sort of banking and credit community. And that was the first piece. And then the next piece was the Community Reinvestment Act of the mid 1970s as well, created CDFIs, and that's a big part of what we think of as a solution. These are these organizations, community development financial institutions, that were actually created in the 70s to solve access to credit, specifically within redlined, often communities. And so these are nonprofit lenders who are backed by the SBA and the largest banks and the largest foundations in the US, with the goal of incentivizing and legalizing larger institutions' contributions to these smaller lenders who are meant to exist to solve small business lending, right? And so when you kind of take a step back and say, okay, well, the history was not necessarily set up for us to succeed, but there were certain things and policies put in place to better enable businesses to get access to credit. Like, why haven't we taken all those steps forward, and why haven't the sort of playing fields level out?
Right. I think you touch into like a very interesting topic where we've needed all of these different institutions and different laws to become into place to exist in order to include the entire population and having them as participants in our economy. And to think that there is a generation alive that has seen the history all throughout, as you mentioned, 70, 60 years ago, it's not even that long. So how do you think these past practices, and even with the changes that have been implemented over time, have impacted the way that women and minority-owned businesses access capital today?
So the reality is that yes, there has been an improvement as it relates to access to credit, but is it balanced and is it fair currently? Meaning, is there equal access to credit? The short answer is no, right? And just to talk about some of those data points, right? In their first year, Black-owned businesses are 7 times less likely to get approved for a loan in their first year as compared to white-owned businesses, right? And then when you sort of expand that out, right, like businesses that have been in business for at least a year and longer, right, they are, 2 times less likely to get access to or get approved for the financing that they are asking for when applying for a business loan, right? And even when they do get approved, they get approved for smaller amounts. And I think that poses the question of, is it that the reality is that these are worse businesses and that's why they're getting denied? Is it that there are some other sort of biases that exist? Or is it that there's other things at play that are contributing to this access to capital gap? And I think what we're starting to see is that there actually is a massive opportunity in lending to these businesses, and they actually are good businesses, but there are things relating to how these businesses are started, how these businesses are initially capitalized, and then how our lending system is set up that continue to make it harder for businesses to discover the right type of available credit for them, and then to tap into those dollars and use them effectively.
Yeah, I think that one of the main points you touched on is why are these businesses still facing the same problems? And when you try to look for this data, sometimes you can't find something that is congruent or that makes sense to why this is happening, right? Are they really riskier? Are they not performing adequately? And then when we started looking at our own data, the findings suggest the opposite, right? What are the most interesting things that you've come across from our report that really suggest this huge opportunity?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. And Paula, you've been a big part of pulling together this data information. And the first time I read it, I was like, can this be so? And we went through it again and again, and we had all our engineers looking at it, our data individuals look at it. And I think what we have found is that, okay, so there's a couple things that contribute to this access to capital gap, but the actual businesses themselves. We've found that Black-owned businesses, on average, are more profitable than white-owned businesses. They declare a profit more often than white-owned businesses, which is really a good thing. And the question is like, wait, but why are they actually forced to be more profitable, or are they being forced to be more profitable? And the answer is it's because they don't have the same access to credit and other types of startup capital to fuel their growth. So the only way that these businesses can grow is through profitability, right? And so, well, that means Black-owned businesses as a whole, because they're forced to be more profitable, shouldn't they get better access to credit? Well, what we found is that the reason why they're not getting more access to credit is because what they're using to start their business is personal credit, meaning, right, they don't have the family friends check to be able to, start and fuel the initial funding of their business. So what are they doing? They're tapping into 10, 15, 20, $50,000 worth of personal credit in order to get their business started, right? And because of that, by starting and using their personal credit to get their business to a point where it's profitable, eventually they start to pay down their personal credit, but it actually in turn drives their credit down, right? And we saw on average, right, 75% of Black-owned businesses had a credit score below 650, while only 46% of white-owned businesses fell in that category, right? And so, well, now we're saying that these businesses are more profitable more frequently, right? Innately, they're a little bit smaller, but why aren't they getting access to business loans? It's because the business underwriting system here in the US is highly reliant on personal credit, right? Which essentially means that the reason why they're not getting access to debt is because of how they're starting their business, and because their own personal credit is tarnished as a byproduct of how they're forced to grow. And so it's this cycle, right, that businesses end up getting into that really makes it difficult for them to take that next leap and that next step forward. And in turn, in terms of debt exposure, even though these are more profitable businesses, meaning they should be able to afford debt easier as compared to white-owned businesses, they often end up also having, right, a less debt exposure as a percentage of revenue and profits than white-owned businesses do as well. And so, the real problem, like why is this an issue, is because what ends up happening is, most businesses, we think the best way to grow a business in terms of capital is revenue first. Okay, right? Black-owned businesses have done that. But eventually you reach a ceiling where you can't pursue a growth opportunity without external capital, because you are forced to decide between running and injecting cash in your business to keep the lights on, and taking that extra investment to open up a new opportunity to continue to scale. And that's very, very hard to do without access to capital. And so, it's really disabling businesses from being able to grow. But we really see this actually as an opportunity for us to think about, one, what Bags can build to help solve some of these pain points, but then also what the broader financial institutions can start to think about, hopefully with this data, about creating new products that could really fit the needs of these businesses because they are great businesses. And that's honestly one of the nuggets that we've been looking for since we started Bags.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that caught my attention, as you mentioned, is whenever these business owners and business founders under minority communities face stricter and more stringent circumstances, they tend to exercise more prudence. So
Yes,
that means they need to be more careful with the decisions that they make, how they spend their money, because there is so much resources and like a limited set of resources available to them that they have to be more strategic in the way that they use it. I'd like to know also, what other issues do you think that contribute to this lack of access to credit?
of course.
And how does the experience of minority-owned and women-owned businesses affected by these external or added issues that they have to face and kind of work around?
Absolutely. Really good question. So, we mentioned one, right? Credit immediately makes it harder for some businesses to pursue different credit opportunities. Um, One of the things that I mentioned earlier is there are institutions like CDFIs that exist, right? That don't consider personal credit as heavily or might have a lower threshold, right? So, one problem that needs to be solved is how do we make CDFIs more discoverable? Right? So that more businesses go to those doors, even if their personal credit is low, right? Because someone would say, oh, well, personal credit's the problem, go to CDFIs. Well, most people don't know CDFIs exist, right? And if you search small business loan on Google, right, like the first 5 pages likely won't present you with a single CDFI, which has an equitable product that actually works for your business. So that's one part of it. Two, we thought that the core way to solve this would be to great, let's make a loan marketplace just sending businesses to CDFIs. And to be honest, it didn't work. We tried really, really hard to make it work. And it was free to use. But we got, honestly, a couple thousand businesses to the doors of CDFIs and people weren't getting approved. So we looked under the hood there and found that one of the main reasons why they weren't getting approved was a lack of financial documentation, right? Because when you think about how the lending process works, right? Initial application, but then you have to submit all supporting documentation. And if you don't have P&L, a balance sheet, a debt schedule, cash flow statement, taxes filed, right? Which are things that hopefully most and all businesses have. But honestly, I get it as a founder. You're like, hey, I'm going to do these things when I need to do it for tax season. As long as more money's coming in than going out, I'm good. But when you go to approach a lender and you don't have those documents, you're denied on the spot, right? And so, there's an element of needing to increase access, needing to build better infrastructure for financial management that potentially could solve access to capital and increase access to credit, which is something that we've actually found to be true in our own model. And then last thing, in terms of ways that we need to, it's building a better infrastructure for businesses to manage that debt over time, right? And I know that's part of an element of financial management, but it's like you need the financial management before you apply the loan, and then you also need the financial management after you get the loan, because what we found is businesses will take the loan, not really look at the doc, sign here on the bottom line, and then proceed on with their day. And then potentially take out an MCA or something really fast and something really expensive. And little do they know they're defaulting on that loan. And so part of the main thing that needs to happen is really create an experience around education that helps businesses understand how to use debt as a way to unlock revenue and cash flow, how to make sure that you manage that debt well, and really do it in a way that's easily accessible, a way that supports businesses with the insights that they need, and a way that really enables them to see their pathway towards growth so that they can take a proactive approach towards debt and not a reactive one.
Yeah, totally makes sense. And I think that you're also mentioning a huge other problem, which is financial education specific
Yes.
to debt and to loans, but still it's part of the problem. It's part of the whole structure in access to capital gaps. But I guess this really leads us into the topic of how VAX is targeting and also making sure that it's addressing the needs of women and minority owned businesses? And how is that part of the team's mission into empowering these communities?
Without a doubt. So first, I think it starts with our internal team and people. Like, I think every single individual on our team is really motivated by the impact that we're having. That's one. Two, the challenge that Bags had as a business, which was like, we want to build something that's truly scalable, but also a sustainable business model. We are not a nonprofit. We think that the solution to this problem should be a for-profit solution so that it is sustainable and can live on and be profitable. And so part of our challenge building our business was like, how do we also build a model that we can sustain, that gets businesses access to capital, that provides more value than what they're paying us in a significant way? And I think what's been really, really exciting about the impact that we've had, at least over the last 12 months, is that it's really starting to work. And so, just to talk about like what we've done and kind of some of those outputs is um, we realized the writing on the wall in regards to financial management. And in order to solve access to capital, we had to solve financial management. We rolled out our full suite financial management solution across bookkeeping and accounting, giving businesses the documentation they need and an interface that helps them understand the core insights that are driving their business, as well as all the debt tooling and debt strategy that they could need and want. And rather than us rely on origination model where lenders pay us, we actually work as an accounting firm, right? So businesses pay us a monthly subscription. And we found that by doing so, we've actually gotten much, much, much better results to the tune of over $14 million in loans originated year to date, which has been a significant step forward. But the main thing when we were looking at our business model before, we were like, okay, what's the ratio of subscribers, to total loans originated, and how do we compare that across the market? And for every one subscriber, they're getting an average of $70,000 worth of credit, right? And when you compare that to an average subscription price of, say, $560 a month, right, which comes out to, almost $7,000, that's 10x the amount of value they're getting from our platform than what they're paying, right? What we're finding is it's not just they get $70,000 and good luck. It's that we're actually able to really be that financial partner in a business's growth. And by doing so, hopefully we can be able to continue to use the data and insights from reports just like this to work with our incredible financial institution partners to build new credit vehicles with new technological infrastructure, like what we're building at Bags, integrated into these platforms and solutions to actually make sure that it's not just here's dollars, good luck, but there's a real sort of stickiness and synergy within the experience that allows businesses to be successful. Because, like, at the end of the day, like we actually have now proven that these are businesses are forced to be better businesses that are profitable businesses and more sustainable if profitability is how we're evaluating businesses. And now we just need to ensure that we're also getting our businesses within our communities to become larger by getting better access to credit over time so that we can get the real net outputs that we want.
Absolutely. There are millions and millions of dollars out there ready for businesses to access, but it's just the access to capital gap also comes from a point of education, time, what resources you already have as a business owner. And at least in my experience in impact finance, is that whenever people want to kind of work around this problem, it's just a matter of just creating a new financial institution, lending out money. When that money is already out there, the problem is how can we get these businesses to access that capital and set them up for success?
Yes.
What steps or opportunities are out there to combat this issue?
Of course. Well, first, I would say, and we're in an interesting time because, there's been a broader DEI backlash, right? And I realized pretty early on, this has to be a conversation about, especially with people who are lending money, about returns, right? And that's what I love about this report. Like, we're saying your likelihood of return is higher by lending to a Black-owned business than a non-Black-owned business, right? Like, this is actually good business, right? And so we hope more institutions will look at this data to think about their lending practices and who they target, and how they deploy capital. So that's the first piece. Like, look at the data, understand there's an opportunity here, right, to make capital and do good business and have an impact while doing so. Next, from there, from an institutional perspective, think about how much of your systems are reliant on personal credit, and whether that is the number one metric that you want to build your lending systems on. And then from a business perspective, as you're thinking about, if you're a business owner listening to this, how would I suggest you actually practically go out and increase your access to capital? One, look up CDFI in your state on whichever browser of choice that you use. Build a relationship with them. Make some calls. It's worth it. That's where you're going to get your best access to good credit. Start there. One. Two, whether it's Bags as your bookkeeping, accounting, and financial management partner or another place, go get your books in order. Do it on a monthly basis. It's worth the investment. Even if you are doing it yourself, again, make sure you get someone there to potentially help and support you. It is worth getting your balance sheet, cash flow statement, and P&L done on a monthly basis, because that is actually the number one thing that will make you loan ready or not. If you don't have that, you can't even start the conversation. And then three, really try to get smart about the different types of debt. We try to do as much education as we can. Check out our resource hub on securebags.com, where you can hopefully learn about some of the different types of debt and how it can work well for you, because the solution isn't one size fits all. You get a term loan, good luck. It's about finding the right type of product for the right use case.
Right. Any final advice that you would give to founders who kind of feel daunted about the funding process, especially when they're starting off?
Of course. Listen, what's true about this data that we're putting out is that, like, as a community, specifically talking to the Black community, like, we are a pretty resilient group of founders. We've made it work. And so my advice is, don't necessarily change the things that are working, right? Continue to drive profitability, continue to drive revenue. But I think the main theme is, like, get your numbers in order. One, that will give you the information to be able to make good business decisions, whether you pursue debt financing or not. Two, think about what your goals are within your business and where there are areas of opportunity. If you can go pursue that area of opportunity without external capital, go do it. If you need external capital, take on exactly how much you need to go pursue that revenue or cash flow generating opportunity, and then go out and pursue the right type of debt for the right solution or the right type of capital, right? And sometimes maybe it's applying for, using crowdfunding, and sometimes it's a loan. But I do think, credit is an incredible resource if used the right way, and if you find it from the right source. And so it might take a little bit more time sometimes, but it's worth the wait.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, DT. This was very, very inspiring to learn that Bags is actually voicing so many concerns and the different needs of businesses, and that's actively looking to our own data and finding out how we can address those gaps and make sure that we get more dollars to those businesses that actually need them.
Absolutely. Thanks, Paula. I appreciate you being part of the team, and joining me for this conversation. This hopefully will not be the last time you're on the Cash Pod. And thank you for everyone listening today.